So Kristen Welker tries to trap JD Vance when talking about Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's meetings. Watch as he absolutely turns the tables on her and obliterates her argument.
Vice President JD Vance, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Welcome to my home. It's good to have you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and we really appreciate the time with you. We have a lot of topics to get to, but I do want to start with some breaking news. We've learned that the FBI is searching the home of former Ambassador John Bolton, his office as well.
Sure.
Can you tell me, why is the FBI raiding Ambassador Bolton's home and office, and did the White House get a heads up?
Well, so we're in the very early stages of an ongoing investigation into John Bolton. I will say we're going to let that investigation proceed. What I can tell you is that unlike the Biden DOJ and the Biden FBI, our law enforcement agencies are going to be driven by law and not by politics. And so if we think that Ambassador Bolton has committed a crime, of course, eventually prosecutions will come. But as you know, Kristen, this is all part of gathering evidence, trying to understand something that we're worried about. And of course, I'll let the FBI comment on the next stage of the investigation.
What's at the root of this? Is this about classified documents?
Well, again, I'll let the FBI speak to that. Classified documents are certainly part of it, but I think that there's a broad concern about Ambassador Bolton. They're going to look into it. And like I said, if there's no crime here, we're not going to prosecute it. If there is a crime here, of course, Ambassador Bolton will get his day in court. That's how it should be. But again, our focus here is on, did he break the law? Did he commit crimes against the American people? If so, then he deserves to be prosecuted. As
we have this conversation, has Ambassador Bolton been detained, taken into custody, arrested in any form?
So this news just broke this morning, and the FBI, I haven't talked to the FBI this morning. I don't know the answer to that question. I assume that he hasn't been detained and won't be detained until there's a prosecution, if that actually happens.
As you know, Ambassador Bolton is a frequent one. Kash Patel's enemies list. The administration has already revoked his security clearance, Secret Service protection. Is Ambassador Bolton being targeted because he's a critic of President Trump?
No, not at all. And in fact, if we were trying to do that, we would just throw out prosecutions willy-nilly like the Biden administration DOJ did, prosecutions that later got thrown out in court. If we bring a case, and of course we haven't done that yet, the Department of Justice has not done that yet, we are investigating Ambassador Bolton, but if they ultimately bring a case, it will be because they determine that he has broken the law. We're going to be careful about that. We're going to be deliberate about that, because we don't think that we should throw people, even if they disagree with us politically, maybe especially if they disagree with us politically. You shouldn't throw people willy-nilly in prison. You should let the law drive these determinations, and that's what we're doing.
But you know, a lot of people have already looked at this and said, this looks a lot like retribution. Is this retribution?
Well, who has said it looks a lot like retribution, Kristen? A lot of people who tried to throw Donald Trump in prison for completely fake charges that were later thrown out by multiple different courts. I suspect that if the media and the American people let this case actually unfold, if they let the investigation unfold as it's currently doing, they're going to find out that what we're doing is being very deliberate and being very driven by the national interest and by the law here, and that's as it should be.
I actually just saw a video today on CNN's reporting of the day that Donald Trump's house got raided versus the day that John Bolton's house got raided. When Mar-a-Lago got raided, they talked as if Donald Trump was a guilty man. Everything that he did, he broke the law, and this is his just punishments. They were coming to him no matter what happened because he's a criminal and he broke the law. Whereas when John Bolton's house got raided, they were saying the Donald Trump DOJ has gone mad. They're attacking their political enemies, and this is 100% unsubstantiated. Even though they know nothing about the raid, they don't know any evidence that's going on. None of us truly know all the evidence. The FBI does. We have to trust their judgment. Donald Trump's trying to restore faith in law enforcement agencies because for years they were just attacking people because they dislike their political ideologies. And if you don't believe me, just look at a list of all Donald Trump's closest allies. They have had to fight for their life. Peter Navarro, Steve Bannon, Rudy Giuliani. Need I say more?
Ukraine.
Sure.
I had the opportunity to speak with the Russian foreign minister.
I heard.
Yes, he says, as of right now, there's no meeting planned between President Putin and President Zelensky. And he added, there needs to be an agenda first, saying, quote, this agenda is not ready at all. Are the Russians stringing President Trump along?
No, not at all, Kristen. I think the Russians have made significant concessions to President Trump for the first time in 3.5 years of this conflict. They've actually been willing to be flexible on some of their core demands. They've talked about what would be necessary to end the war. Of course, They haven't been completely there yet, or the war would be over, but we're engaging in this diplomatic process in good faith. We are trying to negotiate as much as we can with both the Russians and the Ukrainians to find a middle ground to stop the killing. I think what the president has tried to do here is try to engage in very aggressive, very energetic diplomacy, because this war is not in anyone's interest. It's not in Europe or the United States' interest. We don't think it's in Russia or Ukraine's interest to keep going. So we're going to keep on pushing for a diplomatic solution. And one final point about this, Kristen, if you look historically, whenever you have a complicated war with a lot of death and destruction, it kind of goes in fits and starts. There are hills and valleys to the negotiation. We sometimes feel like we've made great progress with the Russians, and sometimes, as the president has said, he's been very frustrated with the Russians. And we're going to keep on doing what we have to do to bring this thing to a close. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think that we're going to continue to make progress, but ultimately, whether the killing stops, that determination is going to belong to whether the Russians and the Ukrainians can actually find some middle ground here.
Well, you talk about concessions, and yet the Russians rejected the ceasefire proposal that President Trump put forward. There's no meeting plan between President Putin and President Zelensky. And this week, Russia targeted an American factory in Ukraine. There were 600 people inside at the time. No one was killed. What makes you think President Putin is serious about peace?
Well, I didn't say they conceded on everything, but what they have conceded is the recognition that Ukraine will have territorial integrity after the war. They've recognized that they're not going to be able to install a puppet regime in Kiev. That was, of course, a major demand at the beginning. And importantly, they've acknowledged that there is going to be some security guarantee to the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Again, have they made every concession? Of course they haven't. Should they have started the war? Of course they haven't. But we're making progress, Kristen. And what I admire about the president in this moment is he's not asking 3.5 years ago. He's not, trying to focus on every nitpicky detail of how this thing started 3.5 years ago. He's trying to focus on the nitpicky details of now, of what do the parties disagree on, what do they agree on, and how do you build a foundation from one side of that ledger to the other so that you can stop the killing.
But was President Trump, were you enraged when you learned that Russia targeted an American company based in Ukraine?
I don't
was
like
that not
it,
a slap
Kristen.
in the face
I
to
don't.
the peace
I don't
process?
like it, Kristen. But this is a war, and this is why we want to stop the killing. The Russians have done a lot of things that we don't like. A lot of civilians have died. We've condemned that stuff from the get-go. And frankly, President Trump has done more to apply pressure and to apply economic leverage to the Russians, certainly than Joe Biden did for 3.5 years when he did nothing but talk, but do nothing to bring the killing to a stop. So you ask me what I'm enraged by. What I'm enraged by is the continuation of the war. What I'm enraged by is a presidency and Joe Biden who for 3 years did nothing to end the killing. What I'm actually excited about right now is that we have a president who's engaging in energetic diplomacy to try to stop the killing. That's as it should be. I think the American people should be proud of it. And whatever the outcome of this, whether the war ends in 3 months or 6 months or hopefully not beyond, but maybe, we should be proud that we have a president who's trying to stop the killing. He's done it, by the way, 6 wars that the president has brought to a close all over the world. This would be the 7th. It's the most complicated, but we're trying despite that.
I had the opportunity to interview Secretary Rubio last week, and he said he actually doesn't think that new sanctions would force Putin into a ceasefire. Are sanctions now off the table, Mr. Vice President?
The sanctions aren't off the table, but we're going to make these determinations on a case-by-case basis. What do we think is actually going to exert the right kind of leverage to bring the Russians to the table? Now, you said sanctions were not going to lead to a ceasefire. I think that's obviously correct. If you look at the way the Russians have conducted themselves, they don't want a ceasefire. They don't want a ceasefire for complicated reasons. We, of course, have pushed for a ceasefire. But again, we don't control what Russia does. If we did, the war would have been over 7 months ago. What we do believe, though, is that we continue to have a lot of cards. The President of the United States has a lot of cards left to play to apply pressure to try to bring this conflict to a close. And that's what we're going to do.
You take me to my next question. Where exactly is the pressure on Russia to do anything if you're not right now imposing new sanctions? How do you get them to a place of getting to the table with Zelensky and stopping to drop bombs?
But, Kristen, I think that question betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of where we are. The president has applied aggressive economic leverage, for example, the secondary tariffs on India, to try to make it harder for the Russians to get rich from their oil economy. He's tried to make it clear that Russia can be re-invited into the world economy if they stop the killing, but they're going to continue to be isolated if they don't stop the killing. The president has applied more economic pressure to the Russians to stop this war than Biden did in 3 years.
You know,
so the idea that we're not doing anything, we're already doing things right now, and this is how negotiation works. You do something, you talk to the parties, you try to see if there's a meeting of minds. Again, we believe we've already seen some significant concessions from both sides just in the last few weeks. We're going to eventually be successful, or we'll hit a brick wall. And if we hit a brick wall, then we're going to continue this process of negotiation, of applying leverage. This is the energetic diplomacy that's going to bring this war to a close.
I mean, that's the philosophy that you need to have if you want to actually end this war. You either win or you learn. Donald Trump is going to do everything in his power to try and end the killing, to try and stop this unnecessary war. What did Joe Biden do while he was in power? How did he try and stop this war? All that he did was demonize Russia, support Ukraine, no matter what. And he made such a scapegoat out of Russia that Russia had to turn to China. And now Russia and China are getting along better now than they ever had before, all due to Joe Biden. They are natural enemies. They share a common border. We do not want China and Russia on the same team teaming up against America. That will not end well. We need to make sure that we need to hear Russia out, we need to actually listen to Russia, hear them out, and try to come to a mutual resolution between Ukraine and Russia. That's the only way that this war is going to end, and that's exactly what Trump is trying to do. I love what JD said. America is not focused on why the war started. We're only focused on ending this so that all these people will stop dying. I really do believe that by bringing Russia back into the fold economically, eventually with other concessions, Russia will finally stop the killing, stop the war. In the next couple weeks, we could 100% see this war coming to a close. And Trump said it himself. If he wants to get into heaven, this is definitely going to play a big role in him getting there.
Buyer of Russian oil.
They're
Why
close.
No
they're about equal.
Why no sanctions on China?
Well, obviously we have a 54% tariff on the PRC right now. So we've already applied pretty hefty sanctions on the Chinese, and we've had a number of conversations at all levels of government to try to encourage the Chinese to be better partners in bringing this war to a close. So again, I think the question betrays a misunderstanding of what's going on. We are applying aggressive economic pressure to bring this war to a close. Maybe we'll apply additional pressure. Maybe if we feel like we're making progress, we'll dial that pressure back. That give and take is part of the negotiation that we think is working. It hasn't reached its final outcome yet, but we're going to keep on working on this process for as long as we can.
Just to boil down what the Russian concessions might look like, is the only thing that President Trump is asking Russia to give up is not to Ukraine? No,
that's not it at all. It's providing the Ukrainians the kind of security guarantees that ensures that the country is not going to be invaded again. And this is really, this is why I think we've made a lot of progress, Kristen. Even though we're not yet there, why we've made a lot of progress is fundamentally the disagreement here is over security guarantees versus where you draw the battle lines in Ukraine. So whether we solve those issues, we've actually identified the two critical issues, one to the Ukrainians, one to the Russians. And I think that that is where the fruit, if we ultimately solve this thing, that's where the fruit of an agreement will come.
I want to get to security guarantees, but
Sure.
Very quickly, if Russia is allowed to keep any of the territory that it illegally seized, what message does that send to China? Does it give China a green light to invade Taiwan? Does it give Russia a green light to invade other European countries, which is what your European allies are concerned about?
Well, first of all, the Ukrainians are going to ultimately make the determination about where you draw the territorial lines in their own country. But, Kristen, this is how wars ultimately get settled. If you go back to World War II, if you go back to World War I, if you go back to every major conflict in human history, they all end with some kind of negotiation. We're actually not active parties in the negotiation. We're effectively mediating. We're trying to mediate the Ukrainians and the Russians to come to some agreement. If the Ukrainians are willing to say something on territory that brings the conflict to the close, we're not going to stop them. We're also not going to force them because it's not our country. We're trying to play a constructive role. The president is trying to play a constructive role to bring peace to the region, but he's not going to force these parties to walk through the door. All he can do is open the door and ask them to negotiate in good faith.
You talk about security guarantees.
Sure.
Foreign Minister Lavrov discussed the importance of Russia being a part of security guarantees. Ukraine says that's a non-starter. Is that a non-starter for the United States as well? How can Russia secure Ukraine when it's dropping bombs on
There's
Ukraine?
a little bit of a talking past each other here. First of all, we're not talking about security guarantees until after the war has come to a close. And of course, the Russians are going to be a part of the conversation about bringing that war to a close. So, of course, they're going to have some stake in this. They're going to talk about this. That doesn't mean that they're going to have troops in Ukrainian territory, but how can you reasonably provide security guarantees without talking to the Russians about what would be necessary to bring the war to a close? So I think there's a little bit of people talking past each other. This is going to be a security guarantee provided by a host of nations. I think the Europeans are obviously going to play a big role. We think there are other countries all over the world that might play a big role. The Russians are going to be involved because they're the critical party that's necessary to stop the killing. Again, this is how negotiations happen. It's this give and take. It's a conversation between both sides.
Very quickly, before I move to domestic issues, for Americans who are watching, can you guarantee no U.S. boots on the ground as a part of these security guarantees?
The president's very clear. There are not going to be boots on the ground in Ukraine, but we are going to continue to play an active role in trying to ensure that the Ukrainians have the security guarantees and the confidence they need to stop the war on their end. And the Russians feel like they can bring the war to a conclusion on their end. It's complicated, Kristen, but we're going to keep on trying to play these parties. We're going to keep on trying to convince these parties to talk to each other and continue to play the game of diplomacy, because that's the only way to get this thing wrapped up.
All right, let's talk about some domestic issues now. This week you were in Georgia. You were there to talk about and promote the One Big Beautiful Bill. And it also comes in the same week that Texas Republicans approved 5 new Republican seats. So they expanded the map for Republicans in their state. If President Trump's agenda is so popular, why do Republicans need to add additional seats to the map?
Well, first of all, Kristen, you have to ask yourself, why have Democrats gerrymandered their states aggressively over the past 10 to 20 years? If you look, for example, at the popular vote in a lot of these states, and Massachusetts, where 32% of the residents of Massachusetts voted for Republicans, 0 Republican federal representatives. So we're not trying to all we're doing, frankly, is trying to make the situation a little bit more fair on a national scale. The Democrats have gerrymandered their states really aggressively. We think there are opportunities to push back against that, and that's really all we're doing.
And yet, Mr. Vice President, you were able to win the House and the Senate in 2024. Why can't you do it again without adding additional seats?
But this is a very important question, Kristen. We had way fewer House seats than we should have. 1, if the Democrats hadn't aggressively gerrymandered, and 2, if illegal aliens weren't counted in the census for purposes of apportioning congressional seats. The best estimates I've seen is that in California, for example, has 5 additional congressional seats than it should have, because they count illegal aliens for the purpose of apportioning representatives. Meanwhile, Ohio, my home state, lost a representative. We're literally losing representatives for American citizens in order to give congressional representation to illegal aliens. Republicans are trying to balance out the scales a little bit for basic fairness and for the integrity of our democracy, which the president cares about as much as anybody in the country.
But of course, people who are here and who are not documented are not eligible to vote. But
they're not eligible to vote, but they do go in the congressional apportionment. That's why California has so many more seats, is because they count illegal aliens. So even though they don't vote, well, some of them actually do vote, but hopefully most of them don't. They end up getting congressional representation that ought by right go to American citizens.
I know we're almost out of time, so 2 more quick ones. The administration deployed the National Guard to D.C. to crack down on crime. You visited with them this week. At least 6 Republican states are sending in their own National Guard troops as reinforcement. But many of these states have cities that actually have crime rates that are worse than Washington, D.C. So why aren't these states sending National Guard troops into their own states to deal with the crime issue?
Well, look,
and is that a possibility?
Well, look, if the local governors want to make that determination, we'll leave it up to the local governors. But what we have control over is the nation's capital. And if you look, for example, at the murder rate in D.C., it rivals some of the worst cities, the most violent cities anywhere in the world. That's a disgrace for our nation. That's a disgrace for the residents who live in D.C., who just want to take their kids to a park or walk down Union Station or take their family out for a bite to eat without being accosted by a vagrant or a violent criminal.
Crime has dropped
they
over
should have that
20%,
right.
though, in the nation's capital.
Crime has dropped over 35% in the nation's capital in 10 days because of what Donald J. Trump has done.
So is that mission accomplished?
I think that there's so much more that we could do. Absolutely not. It's not mission accomplished. When you make such big progress in a matter of a week and a half, I think that you step on the gas and try to make D.C. even more safe. And here's the thing, Kristen, we don't have to live like this. My message to my fellow citizens here in D.C. or all across the country would be that allowing vagrants and armed robberies to take over your city, that's a policy choice. What President Trump is showing is that if you just empower local law enforcement to arrest and prosecute the bad guys, we can take back American streets. You, as a young family, whatever the color of your skin, you should not have to cross the street because there's a crazy person yelling at your children on the other side. You should not be worried that if you take your son out for a meal at 8 o'clock in the evening, an armed robber is going to assault your family. This is a policy choice to allow lawlessness to overrun our cities. The president has made a different policy choice. And I think what he's showing the entire American community is that we don't have to live like this. And that's the biggest thing that will come out of D.C. It matters a lot for D.C., but I think it matters more for the whole country to see that if we just make better choices, we can take back our cities.
I'm getting a wrap. So final question for
Please.
you, Mr. Vice President. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Elon Musk is halting his plans to create a new political party, in part because he wants to support you for president in 2028. I know you've been asked about this. You said you have not discussed this with him.
That's right.
But do you see yourself as the apparent future of the MAGA movement?
No, I see myself as a vice president who's trying to do a good job for the American people, Kristen. And if I do a good job, and if the president continues to be successful, as I know that he will be, the politics will take care of itself. We can cross that bridge when we come to it. But we just had an election 7 months ago. I think I'm probably like most Americans, and I'm already sick of talking about politics after a big general election. The next election that matters is not the election of 2028, it's 2026. So before we talk about anything 3.5 years down the road, let's take a break from politics, focus on governing the country, and when we return to politics, it's going to be to focus on those midterm elections.
Have you had any conversations with President Trump about him passing the torch on to you?
As you know, the president talks about everything. And if it's in the news, the president and I have certainly discussed it. But I think the president is just focused on doing a good job for the American people. He wants me to be focused on doing a good job for the American people. That's what I'll keep on doing. And again, if we take care of business, if America is safer, if it's more prosperous, if young people can afford to buy a home, if we actually bring peace to all of these regions of the world, which we've made great progress in doing, the politics will take care of itself.
I mean, that's it right there. If you want to prove to the American people how successful that you will be if you are the next president, you can show the American people this just through your wins. When you think about Usain Bolt, Michael Phelps, Michael Jordan, do you think, oh my gosh, those guys were great talkers? Or do you think these people were winners? Whatever they set their mind to, they did. Nothing got in their way. That's what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have to do these next 3.5 years. It's just show, you know what? You can hate these guys all you want, but they get stuff done for the American people. That's what their mission is. And the better that they do that job, the less they'll even have to campaign in the next election. But in regards to bringing the National Guard into Washington, D.C., I don't know why anyone would be against that. Washington, D.C. was one of the most dangerous places in the entire world. Now it is one of the safest, and this happened in the course of 2 weeks. I find it so funny that those who are against it say it's racist. How could you possibly do this? There are black governors who are in charge of these areas, and you're bringing in the National Guard. Before the National Guard was brought into Washington, D.C., African Americans were the victims of 86% of all the murders in Washington, D.C. And after the National Guard came in, there has not been a murder in over 2 weeks. This goes to show the strategy wins. People's lives are being saved. That's what Donald Trump cares about. He wants to make the community and the surrounding areas safe so that you're free to walk around with your family and you don't have to be worried about getting jumped, getting mugged, getting carjacked. You can actually live your life without fear. What's so bad about arresting people who are breaking the law? Isn't that the purpose of the law being there? So that the law-abiding citizens don't have to worry about these dang criminals who are just being released with cashless bail? fail, it is absolutely asinine. And in regards to gerrymandering, JD Vance is right. They've been doing this for 10, 20 years. Kristen Welker wants to say, oh, well, you won last time, even though they were doing it. Why don't you just win again? That's not the point, Kristen. If you were playing a game of basketball 5-on-3 and the team with 3 people ended up winning, does that mean that it was a fair fight? Does that mean that it was a fair game? Absolutely not. We're going to even the odds. We're going to not count illegal immigrants in the census. And then and only then will we get the true pulse of America to see how Americans are actually feeling. Because I really do believe in my heart of hearts that 2024 was stacked against Trump and Vance, and they still pulled a rabbit out of their hats because that was just a sweeping win. We won the Senate, House, and the presidency, but I think we should have won even more. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this down below. Do you think it's unfair that a lot of Republican states are gerrymandering now and removing illegal immigrants off the census? And do you think the National Guard should be brought into all these major cities across America? And if you enjoyed, make sure to smash that like, comment, subscribe, and wish you guys nothing but the best. Till next time.